Hey everyone, and welcome back to Exposed, Scandalous Files of the Elite. I'm your host, Jim Chapman, and today I am back with this 18th episode in the Sean Diddy Combs series. And since this is the first episode that I have brought you since the holiday, I hope all of you had a wonderful Thanksgiving with family and friends, and it is onward to Christmas now. Can you believe it? I don't know about y'all, but 2024 flew by for me, that's for sure. So I'm going to jump right into this one because I have a lot to cover today in this crazy saga with Diddy. 5 new lawsuits have been filed since the last filings that I covered in regard to the Diddy case. Of course, filed by Diddy's favorite attorney, Tony Busby, and the Tony Busby law firm. So I'm going to cover all of that. But before I get into all of those, I've got some news to cover with you. And I'm going to start with an article that came out on November 22nd regarding one of Diddy's former bodyguards, a guy who went by the name of Uncle Ron. Now, throughout this whole deal, I told you that one of the main concerns, especially as it relates to Diddy staying in jail pending his trial, was safety. Harder for Diddy to touch you when he's behind bars, right? Well, the bodyguard I just mentioned, Uncle Ron, he was found dead back in September. And since then, some rumors have been flying pretty much everywhere regarding what happened. And this article really covered the latest talk on this. And here it is. With music mogul Sean Diddy Combs in prison following his September arrest, rumors are starting to spread concerning one of his bodyguards, Ron Smith, also known as Uncle Ron. The bodyguard had passed away back in September. Since then, some fans have been alleging a conspiracy concerning his death. Uncle Ron released a video concerning Biggie Smalls. And y'all, Biggie Smalls, also known as Biggie, big rap star, was killed shortly after Tupac's death. Some people say Diddy had something to do with that, but I continue on. In addition to his work as a bodyguard, Uncle Ron served as something of a TikTok personality. Tragically, Smith passed away this September. A video released on Smith's TikTok channel announcing his passing was shared by his wife, Evelyn. It ran, "I want to inform everyone on TikTok of my husband's passing. Uncle Ron will always be remembered and loved." The post, which was shared September 13th, continued, "If you can help with donations towards his funeral, it would be deeply appreciated. Thanks, his wife, Evelyn." Now, at this time, there is no evidence to suggest foul play concerning his death. However, rumors have begun to circulate claiming that Smith died of pneumonia. These rumors continue to allege that other people in Diddy's inner circle have died under similar circumstances. In a video released prior to his death, Smith alleged that Diddy and Jay-Z wanted to see the death of Biggie Smalls. Jay-Z and Diddy wanted Biggie killed. Bottom line, here's a man, Biggie, that wanted to leave Bad Boy Records. He wanted to do his own thing, Uncle Ron was quoted as saying. And he continued. He mentioned several times that he was tired of being used and abused, that he was bigger than Bad Boy himself, he also alleged. Jay-Z wanted him out of the industry, period. It's all business, folks. Now, at this time, it's unclear if this came out of Smith having any insider information or if he was just speculating. Ron Smith was not the only former bodyguard to speak out against Diddy. Another member of Diddy's security team, former bodyguard Gene Deal, also recently made claims about the mogul, and I brought you some of those interviews regarding Gene Deal. During one particular interview, Deal also discussed online rumors of a plot to poison Jamie Foxx concerning Diddy. Deal shared, "I really want to hear the full story," noting it was trending on the internet. However, he shared that, "I don't know how true it is." And I've had a lot of people ask me about that as well. So the story, as I understand it, was Jamie Foxx made a reference to that in the midst of a comedy act. He essentially made a joke out of it. From what I understand, it wasn't to be taken literal. But a lot of people did, and a lot of people ran with it. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying when he made that comment, it was made in the midst of a comedy show. So take with that what you want. So I also told you in the last episode about Diddy requesting bail yet again. And every time he goes up for a bail hearing, and it's been several times now, he sweetens the pot as it relates to what he will do to get out of jail and what he can offer. US Weekly did a pretty good job with this article, which ran November 23rd, concerning his latest offer. The legal team for Sean Diddy Combs requested the disgraced music mogul be allowed to be placed under house arrest in his Upper East Side apartment in New York City, along with a $50 million bond. Diddy's attorney suggested that one security guard could be stationed downstairs at the building where the apartment is located, along with 2 additional security guards stationed inside the 3-bedroom abode itself. Diddy would not have access to the internet or telephone, and he would only be able to communicate with his counsel. All calls would be arranged through the approved security team. Diddy's lawyers said they believed that allowing him to be under house arrest in his apartment would be substantially more restrictive than where he is currently housed at Brooklyn Metro Detention Center. I doubt that. Along with not having access to the internet or phone, Diddy would not be allowed to have visitors unless they were his attorneys. The lawyer suggested the visits with his family would be permitted only if they were approved before the trial. Diddy's legal team argued that the Grammy Award winner should be able to prepare for his upcoming trial due to new evidence and circumstances. A decision on whether Diddy will be released is expected to come out next week. Diddy's counsel had first requested the Bad Boy Records founder be allowed, and pay attention to this, y'all, open up your ears, be allowed to be placed under house arrest at his home on a private island called Star Island in Florida. Man, he is not doing himself any favors if he's trying to avoid looking like Epstein, right? The home, which was one of Diddy's properties that were raided by Homeland Security in March, only has one way on and off the island. There is a dock, but the lawyers clarified he would not have access to a boat while there. Yeah, right. The request was immediately shot down by the judge, who said, that is not going to work. Diddy's legal team has made a total of 4 requests for bail since his arrest. He was hit with a slew of charges, and I've been through all that. Now, his attorney said he is disappointed with the decision to even pursue the prosecution of Mr. Combs. He's a music icon, self-made entrepreneur, loving family man, and a giving man who has spent the last 30 years building an empire, adoring his children, and working to uplift the Black community. So there you have it. No private island for Diddy, but as I move on today, a little bit concerned about some things with regard to him being able to bail out. Now, also in the last episode, I mentioned we would be in between episodes when he had that bail hearing. He actually had that last Friday. And during that bail hearing, his defense team really pushed the whole leaks issue in the fact that the court did not want Diddy communicating on social media or allowing others to communicate on his behalf on social media. His team says, hey, that's necessary because Diddy wants to prove his innocence, essentially. But for the record, I'm more than confident all Diddy's trying to do here is sway public opinion. That's it. But the judge heard the argument out, and he requested more information before making a ruling on whether he will grant Diddy bail. So his defense team, they provided a legal brief to the court the very next court day, which was on a Monday. And they cited a Trump case, of all things, as precedent in the matter. I had that actual document that was filed with the court, and here's how that read. Defendant Sean Diddy Combs respectfully submits this letter in response to the court's request at the November 22nd, 2024 hearing for further briefing on the contours of the types of communications that Mr. Combs is able to engage in, consistent with this court's order. For months and months, government agents, plaintiffs, attorneys, and others questioned motives that have been polluting the airways with false and outrageous claims about Mr. Combs. This nonstop drumbeat of negativity has destroyed his reputation and will make it virtually impossible for him to receive a fair trial. Mr. Combs is not required to sit idly by and allow all of this. He has the right to a fair trial and a constitutional right to speak out on his own behalf. The government's arguments that asking his children to post birthday wishes on Instagram and that he is not entitled to publicly express his opinion that this prosecution is racially motivated are quite simply unconstitutional in an effort to silence him. Mr. Combs sought only to stop a wave of publicity he perceived as prejudicing potential jurors and injuring his reputation in the community. His communications directed at the public are protected speech under the First Amendment and cannot justify denying bail, or indeed preventing him from engaging in protected public relations efforts, so long as they comply with the carefully tailored legal limits imposed by the controlling authorities as described below. And in Section 1, and this is where they reference Trump, Mr. Combs' communications regarding potential public statements and social media posts constitute speech protected by the First Amendment. It says in the United States versus Trump, the D.C. Circuit assumed without deciding that the most demanding scrutiny applies to pretrial speech restrictions on criminal defendants and that only a significant and imminent threat to the administration of criminal justice will support restricting speech. The court considered but rejected application of the less exacting substantial likelihood of material prejudice standard. And then it's a bunch of legalese that I'm not going to get into, but I found it interesting that they cited his Trump case as basically saying, well, Trump was allowed to do this. Why didn't Diddy? And it just went on and on with that. Look, they're fighting their ass off. I'll give them that to get bail for Diddy. He's probably in there, y'all, and he is just freaking the hell out. I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. Get me out of here. I mean, he's pressuring these dudes. They are not giving up. So the government, they respond when this is filed, and they actually responded the same day. And in that response, they list some examples as to why they don't want Diddy getting bail. And this is kind of interesting. And one of the things they note is in 2016, the defendant bribed security officers with $100,000 in cash to destroy evidence of a brutal assault on a female victim while they were in a LA hotel for a freak-off. He's talking about Cassie, y'all. In doing so, the defendant relied on intermediaries to reach out to security staff and help carry out the cover-up. This act is alleged as part of the bribery, racketeering, conspiracy predicate. They're trying to prove there that if he gets out on bail, he's going to start trying to bribe a bunch of people. Then they list another example as a victim filed a civil lawsuit in 2023, alleging, among other things, the victim's participation in freak-offs was not consensual. The defendant made multiple efforts to interfere with victims and witnesses by feeding those individuals false narratives regarding the defendant's criminal conduct. For instance, the defendant caused intermediaries, former and current security staff, to repeatedly call a former employee who had witnessed firsthand the defendant's abuse of a victim. The intermediary told the employee, in sum and substance, that what she had observed was normal. Around that same time, as highlighted at a prior hearing, the defendant recorded 2 phone calls with a different victim, in which the defendant attempted to feed victim 2 a false narrative regarding victim 2's involvement in a freak-off, namely that they were consensual. In another example of them saying he needs to stay in jail, the defendant has evidently deleted text messages between himself and key witnesses, including a grand jury witness and a victim, in this criminal case. One of these witnesses is a male commercial sex worker who participated in freak-offs and received a grand jury subpoena during the investigation. After defense counsel represented unequivocally at the prior bail hearing before Judge Carter that the defendant would not reach out to grand jury witnesses, it became clear the defendant had done just that. Phone calls and electronic evidence shows the defendant contacted witness one repeatedly leading up to and after his appearance in the grand jury, and that the defendant apparently deleted the messages from his phone after that. There were further communications and there were text messages throughout the entire period, including to state that the weapon used in this incident was his and did not belong to the defendant. On November 18th, 2024, Jamal Barrow, the defendant's former Bad Boy Records protege and his co-defendant in that case, and they're talking about Shine, he made public statements about taking the fall for the defendant in the incident. Barrow further stated publicly that following the public allegations against the defendant contacted him to make sure that, in sum and substance, they were still on the same page. The defendant has denied his involvement in the shooting and has sent a cease and desist letter regarding Barrow's statements. While in a pretrial detention at the MDC, the defendant has used multiple unauthorized means of communications, which make it difficult or impossible to monitor his communications. While the government's substantial investigative efforts have identified some accounts that the defendant is improperly using and the government has obtained and produced these communications, the government has no way of knowing whether there are other PAC or Contact Me ASAP accounts the defendant is using of which the government is not aware. Put simply, when the defendant uses other inmate accounts, his communications are very difficult, if not impossible, for the Bureau of Prison and the government to track and monitor. Such barriers to monitoring the defendant have real significant consequences given the defendant's extensive efforts to taint the jury pool. And it's important to note, even after defense counsel represented that the defendant had stopped using the Contact Me ASAP app, he has continued to use the account of at least one other inmate, sending messages to a family member as recently as November 24th, which was the day before this was filed. And it goes on. While at the prison, the defendant has instructed family members and third parties to contact multiple potential victims and witnesses. The defendant has provided these instructions to others by using unauthorized means of communication, which, as described above, are difficult to monitor and often use coded language. The potential victims and witnesses that the defendant has instructed others to contact include former romantic partners and former employees, most of whom have experienced or witnessed the defendant's significant violence. At the November 22nd, 2024 hearing, defense counsel argued that these contacts went through attorneys. However, that's simply not the case. For example, the defendant asked a family member to call victim number 2. Separately, the defendant had a family member three-way dial a co-conspirator and the defendant, and co-conspirator used coded language, discussing a certain, and it's redacted out, who has, and it's redacted out, now, and it's redacted out. I'd love to see what that sentence is. And it goes on. While at the MDC, the defendant orchestrated a social media campaign around his birthday for the express purpose of influencing the jury in a criminal case. In the multiple calls leading up to the birthday post, all of which occurred on unauthorized communication channels, the defendant meticulously planned out the post. The video depicting 6 of the defendant's children singing him happy birthday while speaking to the defendant over the phone were initially posted to the defendant's children's pages, but the defendant was not satisfied it would reach the correct demographic. The defendant told a family member that he had been tracking the analytics and directed a family member to post the video to his personal page because the defendant's social media followers are, and it's totally redacted out. In another call the same day, the defendant talked about the reach of this social media post and said, and that is also totally redacted. I don't know why that would be so private. In the rest of that, again, legalese that I'll spare you the boredom on, but some pretty good points by the prosecution as to why Diddy can't be trusted, basically. That's what they're saying in a nutshell. So all these arguments, they go back and forth, right? Because Diddy, he's wanting to get home for Thanksgiving. Well, the judge has pushed his decision off until next week, which makes me a little nervous. I mean, he's considering it and giving it more thought than I assumed that he would. Time will tell at this point, but I would say it's closer to 50-50 than I ever thought it would be that Diddy would actually get bail. And guess what? I got some breaking news that I'm going to give you. I just told you all of that. And now this, actually, while I'm recording this, just came through my phone. I'm going to read it to you. Sean Diddy Combs, breaking news. The judge ruled that no condition or combination of conditions will reasonably assure the safety of the community if the music mogul was released. Sean Diddy Combs will not be home for the holidays. The judge overseeing his sex trafficking and racketeering case ruled on Wednesday that Combs must stay behind bars ahead of his trial in May. In his ruling, the judge wrote that there is no condition or combination of conditions which will reasonably assure the safety of the community if he is granted release. Combs, who is 55, is currently jailed in Brooklyn's detention center. The news comes just days after Combs' legal team outlined their plans if he were to be released. They said that he would live in an apartment on Manhattan's Upper East Side with 24/7 armed security and would only be allowed to call his attorneys and have visitation from pre-approved family members. But prosecutors argued that letting Combs out would be detrimental, and I went through those arguments with you, so he didn't wait until that next week to rule on that. I'm dropping this on Tuesday. So this occurred actually the day before Thanksgiving. Big win for the prosecution. I don't think Combs is getting out before this trial. That was the fourth attempt. I just don't think there's anything else they can offer that would convince that judge that he should be released. And shout out to the judge for that. That's great news. He doesn't need to be released. So as I mentioned at the very top of this one, we got 5 more lawsuits to dissect, and we're going to jump right in with all these, all filed, incidentally, on the 19th of November in the Southern District of New York. And the first one was filed by the Busby Law Firm on behalf of a Jane Doe, and she resides in Maryland. And she states that in 2021, the plaintiff, who was 18 years old at the time, and her cousin attended a Halloween party held at Club New Yorker in Manhattan. Combs and his entourage also attended the party, and they provided drinks to the plaintiff and her friends throughout the night. During the Halloween party, one of Combs' security guards escorted the plaintiff and 2 friends to a large black SUV limousine parked within walking distance of the club. They entered the vehicle and saw Combs sitting in the back. At least 6 members of Combs' security team were also in the limousine. One of the men handed the plaintiff a drink. Minutes later, she began feeling dizzy, intoxicated, and disoriented. She felt as though she was able to control her own actions. Based on information and belief, Combs, by himself or through his agents' employees, previously laced the drink with drugs, including but not limited to GHB or ecstasy. This behavior towards the plaintiff mimics a pattern of Combs and his employees drugging unsuspecting victims in order to make it easier for Combs to sexually assault that person. Unfortunately, the plaintiff was one such victim. Combs ordered the plaintiff to perform oral sex on one of the security guards. In turn, the security guard ordered the plaintiff to remove her shirt. The guard fondled the plaintiff's breast and forced her head and mouth onto his penis. Combs then ordered the plaintiff and 2 other women to take turns performing oral sex on each of the other men. Drugged, scared, and confined among numerous men, the plaintiff did as Combs and his security guards ordered. Combs called the women profanities as he degradingly sprayed champagne all over them as they performed the sexual acts against their will. Ultimately, Combs forced the plaintiff to perform oral sex on himself, which she did. Thereafter, Combs and his security staff allowed the plaintiff and other women to leave. The plaintiff struggled to exit the vehicle and suffered from a splitting headache as she made her way back to the VIP section of the nightclub, where she subsequently passed out. When she awoke the following morning, she was at a friend's house without any recollection of how she arrived. In the aftermath of the assault, the plaintiff struggled with emotional pain, mental health issues, feeling disgusted and depressed, and symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Sick. 18-year-old girl. And we'll move on to the second of those 5 filings, another Jane Doe. And this Jane Doe resides in Texas. And on or around July 4th of 2004, the plaintiff, a 17-year-old model at the time, was attending a modeling gig in Manhattan. Afterwards, she was approached by 2 men in a dark SUV. The men gave her a flyer for a party happening later that evening. The plaintiff decided to go to the party and dialed the number on the flyer. Shortly after, a car picked her and her friend up and brought them to the party. The party turned out to be one of defendant Combs' infamous 4th of July parties at his estate in the Hamptons. Combs' Hampton parties regularly attracted A-list celebrities from across entertainment, fashion, and business. This one was no different. The event was decorated lavishly, featured live music, and boasted top-tier food and beverages. Many unsuspecting individuals, like the plaintiff, were recruited to attend these parties. Some of this recruitment, as with the plaintiff, took place in Manhattan. When the plaintiff arrived, Combs' staff at the front door required her to hand over her purse and her cell phone prior to entering. The plaintiff recognized numerous celebrities in attendance as she walked around the party. Servers circulated throughout the rooms of the mansions with trays of drinks, and the plaintiff decided to have one. Shortly after drinking it, the plaintiff began feeling lightheaded and disoriented. Based on information and belief, Combs by himself or through his employees previously laced the drink with drugs. That's his MO, right? As she grew strikingly disoriented, the plaintiff searched for a place to sit. She stumbled onto the couch and lost consciousness. 17. When she awoke, the plaintiff's underwear was missing, and she felt throbbing pains in her vagina and her anal areas. At this point, the plaintiff was alone, and she could not find her friend who had accompanied her to the party. In a state of panic, she began to hyperventilate and cry. Combs and 2 of his bodyguards then approached the plaintiff and threatened her. Combs told the plaintiff that she would be in danger if she spoke about what had occurred, stating he ran New York and he would ruin her. At this point, the plaintiff recognized that at least Combs had sexually assaulted her while she was unconscious. She feared for her life. The plaintiff was coerced into agreeing not to contact the police in exchange for return of her purse and phone. She agreed out of fear of what would happen if she did not. Combs' security team then escorted the plaintiff out of Combs' estate and into a car, dropping her off at a hotel in the East Hamptons. Plaintiff was taken to the hotel alone and did not see her friend again for 2 days. Out of fear of retaliation, the plaintiff did not file a police report or seek medical attention. In the aftermath, she's experienced intense emotional pain and mental health issues. How much of a man do you have to be to threaten a 17-year-old girl? You're a real man, Sean Combs. A real man. What a fucking joke. We'll move on. We're going to the third lawsuit that was filed on the 19th of November, and this one pertains to a John Doe. And this John Doe is a male who resides in Florida. And he said in 2022, plaintiff mingled and spent time with the associates of Combs' businesses at a popular Miami nightclub. He did not consume alcohol at the nightclub. After spending some time with these individuals, an associate of Combs invited the plaintiff to an after-hours event being hosted by Combs at a residential home. Combs' business associates escorted the plaintiff to a black SUV, which drove plaintiff and another female to the party. After arriving, the plaintiff entered the residence and joined the other partygoers. Plaintiff saw about 45 to 50 people, many of whom were recognizable public figures. While mingling and making small talk with others, an associate of Combs approached the plaintiff, indicating Combs wanted to meet him. The associate took the plaintiff upstairs, where Combs greeted him with a drink and offered him a tour of the house. The plaintiff obliged and began following Combs around the home. The tour came to an end in a bedroom. The bedroom smelled strongly of marijuana. 5 other individuals, 3 men and 2 women, apart from Combs and the plaintiff, were inside the room as well. As plaintiff and Combs entered the room, Combs demanded the women perform sexual dances and acts on the other 3 men. Around this same time, the plaintiff suddenly began to feel weak and disoriented, unlike anything he had ever experienced with alcohol before. As the plaintiff's condition worsened and he began to fall in and out of consciousness. Plaintiff soon lost consciousness entirely. At some point later, he woke to a sharp pain in his rectum and anus. As he regained some awareness, he noticed his clothes were missing, yet he had no memory of removing them or where they were. As he turned around to check the pain coming from his anus, he saw Combs naked, fully erect, trying to insert his penis into the plaintiff's anus. The plaintiff heard Combs talking dirty to him and the others in the room, and the plaintiff recalls Combs telling him, "This is what you want," all while wearing a disturbing smile. The drugs prevented the plaintiff from fighting back or otherwise resisting Combs' assault. The plaintiff eventually slipped back into unconsciousness. The plaintiff woke the next morning in the same bedroom alone. Almost immediately, as if someone could see inside of the room through a camera or other device, a member of Combs' security team entered, handed the plaintiff his clothes, and instructed him to get dressed and prepare to leave. Combs' associates and the security team escorted the plaintiff out of the residence. They drove him back to the Miami nightclub and dropped him off. Since that night, the plaintiff has suffered significant physical and mental harm, including anxiety disorders and fear of group gatherings. He did not previously speak out about the encounter due to fear of retaliation from Combs and his associates. And y'all, that is a lot of the fucking problem. These people weren't speaking out, and I've talked about this before, but they're scared shitless of this guy. Look, you don't want somebody with Combs' kind of money having a grudge against you. There's a lot they can do. It's sad but true. So don't think because all these people are coming out now, don't have that perception that, well, why didn't they say something then? Because they were scared shitless because that motherfucker could kill you. Some people have fear of that, but they're empowered now. They feel somewhat protected because he's in jail, and let's hope he stays there. And I'll move on to number 4 of those 5 lawsuits filed on November 19th. And this is another John Doe. This John Doe is a male who resides in Georgia. And he says in or around 2022, the plaintiff, then 39 years old, attended a party hosted by defendant Sean Combs in a large, glamorous home in New York City. The plaintiff attended the party with friends and started off the evening socializing with other guests. During the course of the night, the plaintiff consumed alcohol that had been provided to him by other individuals at the party. We all know what happens then, right? After consuming the drink, the plaintiff began to feel disoriented, began to lose control of his body, and to lose consciousness. Based on information and belief, Combs previously laced the drink. Shortly after having the drink, the plaintiff completely blacked out. When the plaintiff regained consciousness, he was in a dark bedroom with black walls on a bed with black sheets. Everything around him was dark. The plaintiff was horrified to find Combs on top of him, sodomizing him. The plaintiff, in a state of shock and confusion, forcefully fought Combs off and fled the room, making his way to a nearby bathroom. There, the plaintiff discovered that his anus was bleeding and that he was still feeling severely disoriented. Despite being in a dazed, disoriented state, the plaintiff fled the house in an effort to escape the situation as quickly as possible. He did not return to the party after the assault. The plaintiff was traumatized by the assault and continues to experience emotional distress as a result of the incident. And I don't know what the black walls, black sheets, and all that were about. Sounds almost like a little dungeon room of some sort. But we'll move on to the fifth of those 5 lawsuits and another John Doe. And this John Doe is a male who resides in Texas. And he says in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the plaintiff was an actor, regularly traveling across the United States for auditions and roles on stage and screen. After finding out about a role playing a police officer in a music video, the plaintiff exchanged phone calls with a female casting director in New York. In October of 2001, he traveled to Manhattan to meet with her. He was excited for his big break into music videos. The plaintiff booked a room at the Hotel Newton on Manhattan's Upper West Side and arrived in New York City the night before his meeting. The next day, around 2 p.m., the plaintiff reported to a hotel along the south side of Central Park as instructed by the casting director. He checked in with reception, who directed him to a suite near the top of the hotel. The plaintiff was met there by the casting director and a muscular, middle-aged African-American man who indicated he worked for defendant Combs and appeared to be Combs' assistant or bodyguard. The plaintiff recalls approximately a dozen others in the room as well. Combs' bodyguard told the plaintiff to make himself comfortable on the couch and began asking questions about the plaintiff's background and his fitness routines. Shortly after that, Combs arrives and introduces himself. The bodyguard informed Combs that the plaintiff was the white guy for the cop role. Combs began asking the plaintiff more questions about his experience and lifestyle. He asked the plaintiff if he was in New York with anyone or if he had any friends there. The plaintiff said no to both questions and indicated he was just there for the audition. Combs told the plaintiff to stand up and take his shirt off. While the plaintiff was standing there, Combs asked him if he was comfortable with potentially doing nude scenes, and then asked him to turn around. While he was turning, plaintiff heard Combs say, "He'll do." Combs then told the plaintiff he could sit back down. Once the plaintiff sat back down, the casting director offered him an alcoholic drink, which he declined. She then offered him a Diet Coke in a glass, which he drank, but noted it tasted strange. At that point, the plaintiff realized the casting director was the only female in the room. The conversation continued regarding the music video and the shooting schedule, but as time passed, the plaintiff started to feel dizzy and nauseous. He asked to use the bathroom because he felt like he might pass out. Shortly after that, the plaintiff indeed did pass out. Based on information and belief, Combs or his employees previously laced the plaintiff's drink with drugs. The plaintiff came into a twilight state, still dizzy and nauseous, but semi-conscious and disoriented. As the plaintiff tried to get his bearings, he realized he was laying face down across a large ottoman with his head and arms hanging off of one side and his lower half of his body hanging off of the other. His pants were pulled down to his ankles and his shirt was pulled over his head. He felt a great deal of pain and realized, as he looked back, that he was being anally sodomized by Combs. His vision was blurry, but he recognized Combs' chest tattoo and the large gold chain with a jeweled cross on it that Combs was wearing during the interview. The plaintiff tried to fight him off, but he felt dizzy and sick whenever he tried to move. Additionally, Combs' bodyguard was holding the plaintiff down by the arms. The plaintiff recalls hearing a few other people in the room laughing and talking and seeing what appeared to be camera flashes going off, but he couldn't see anything directly at this point. When Combs was finished, he and the bodyguard stood up and the bodyguard started putting a condom on himself. The plaintiff tried to get up and move quickly, but immediately felt another wave of dizziness and nausea. He could not support his own weight when he tried to stand and passed out again. When he came to, he was being held in a kneeling position by a Caucasian man who was sitting on the couch in front of him and orally sodomizing him. The plaintiff tasted metal and believed some sort of device was holding his mouth open because he tried to bite down but could not. Good for him. Good for him. He tried to bite that man's dick off. The plaintiff later discovered he had a broken molar requiring repair and partial denture from whatever was put in his mouth. The man verbally humiliated the plaintiff while assaulting him. Plaintiff recalls the brutality with which this man forced himself into the plaintiff's mouth, and the plaintiff passed out again from a lack of oxygen as the man ejaculated. The next time the plaintiff came to, he was on the floor and completely naked. He was more coherent at this point and could clearly see others in the room engaging in various sex acts, drinking and smoking. Combs and the bodyguard remained, but the plaintiff no longer saw that female casting director. Embarrassed and violated, the plaintiff tried to cover himself up and started looking for his clothes. Once he found his pants, shirt, and shoes, he ran for the door without his underwear and also without one of his prized possessions, a commemorative leather jacket he got from working as a stuntman on the film RoboCop. Plaintiff never saw that jacket again. As he ran out, he heard someone near the door laugh and say, "Hope you had fun." The plaintiff made his way downstairs and managed to make it to the sidewalk before breaking down. It was near dusk at this point. A doorman asked the plaintiff if he was all right, and the plaintiff responded that he just needed to get back to his hotel. The doorman helped the plaintiff get a cab, and he returned to his room at the hotel where the plaintiff vomited all night, replaying the trauma of what had just happened. He feared others' disbelief and or the perpetrator's retaliation if he told anyone. He changed his return flight to the next morning to get home as soon as he could. And y'all got to hear this. It gets worse. Once back at home, the plaintiff tried to put the event out of his mind, but was reminded of it when he painfully defecated a used condom and realized he was bleeding rectally. When the bleeding did not stop for a couple of days, the plaintiff visited a local clinic and then a proctologist who repaired plaintiff's anus with a laser procedure. Plaintiff also ended up having to purchase false teeth to replace the two that were cracked as a result of the incident. In the aftermath of the assault, the plaintiff struggled with intense emotional pain and mental health issues, feeling disgusted and deeply depressed. He has experienced a significant impact on his personal life. He is never married and often struggles to maintain relationships due to the assault. The plaintiff describes himself as an all-American guy, yet acknowledges that not a day goes by without thoughts of this traumatic incident. Of all the ones I read today, and they're all super disturbing. I'm not going to say one's more disturbing than the other, but fuck. This guy, totally out of control, Sean Combs. And these are real people, real people. That guy, what I just read you, what he went through, I believe every word of it. And when you're that descriptive, I mean, you're describing the chain he was wearing. You're describing how many people are in the room. You're telling the truth. You don't provide that many details when you're lying. That's the fifth and final one that was filed on November 19th. And there's more coming. Obviously, there's 100 more coming, believe it or not. But that's all I got for you today. I want to thank all of you for your support. Check out the Patreon. We do commercial-free early releases, quarterly gifts. We drop files like the lawsuit documents that I just read you. We drop those on the Patreon. So if you're interested, go check that out. Give us a follow, a like on Facebook. I love communicating with everyone on that page, and I'd love to see you there. If this is your first time listening, a lot of things coming up. Tomorrow, you got to listen to Bad Teachers. This is a bad one. It's very detailed, and that will be the second episode released in our new Bad Teachers series. So check that out big things coming in January. I can't say anything right now, but there's some big things coming in January, so just stay tuned for that. And until next time, for Exposed, Scandalous Files of the Elite, I'm your host, Jim Chapman. Much love.